3. This is part 3 of What If Luffy Was Born into the Dragon Clan. We time skip a couple of months to where Luffy is wandering around Grey Terminal looking for something to do. He is walking while minding his own business when 3 kids run past him and the people chasing them are yelling at them to return the stolen items. When Luffy reaches out and grabs them, they start struggling to get free. Until one of the kids look up and says, "Luffy, what are you doing here?" Luffy looks at the black-haired one and says, "Hey Ace." The men who were chasing Ace, the blonde, and the redhead come up and thank Luffy for catching them and tells him to hand them over. Luffy raises an eyebrow and replies with, "Now why would I want to do that?" The men point a gun at Luffy and tells him to hand over the kids or he will get killed, but Luffy just starts to laugh. The man asks, "What's so funny, kid?" Another says, "This kid is either really scared or he is out of his damn mind." The third guy out of the group of 12 people says, "He looks really familiar for some reason." Wait, what? The group turns to the guy and asks, "Did he also steal from us once before?" Luffy would continue laughing at them and getting tired of him. The one with the gun pointed at Luffy's head would pull the trigger, but Luffy would then catch the bullet in between his teeth and then immediately punch the dude in the chest so hard his chest would cave in, and enraged the others in the group would start to attack Luffy, but after 3 more fall to Luffy, the guy would remember who the kid is and would scream, "Run, everybody run." Another would ask why, the guy would then yell, "It's the demonic dragon," and everyone in the area would then freeze, and the redhead would be terrified because he'd recognize the name from hearing it cause he was born in the darkness of the underworld. He would have been raised in it. The men would all run away and Luffy would then turn to the 3 kids and would pick them up and run into the forest. He would set them down in a clearing that's in the forest and he would then ask the 2 with Ace, "Hey brats, what is your names?" The blonde would then tell Luffy that his name is Sabo, and the red hair while stuttering would say, "My name is Yato." Ace and Sabo would be confused on why Yato is stuttering because he's never had that problem before. Luffy would then tell them that his name is Luffy and Ace would start talking with Luffy, but Yato would jump on Ace and cover his mouth and whisper in his ear that he is talking to the demonic dragon, and Ace would reply saying, "So what? He's just my brother so I can talk to him if I want." Yato would then explain who and the demonic dragon is and what he is known for. Ace would just go, "That's cool." Surprised Sabo would ask Luffy why he was there and Luffy would explain that he was just bored and decided to take a walk and ended up finding the 3 of them. Sabo would nod his understanding. Luffy would then talk with all of them and then leave. Now we time skip 2 years to when Luffy is 14 and Ace and Sabo are 12 while Yato is 9. Garp would come and train. By train I mean Garp just threw trees at them, chased them through the forest and had Luffy shoot elemental bullets at them. He trained Ace, Sabo, and Yato. At the age of 13 Ace sees Luffy's sword and tries to take it to look at it, but Luffy would stop him and tell him rather harshly to not try and do that again, and Ace never seen this side of Luffy and wondered what was up with the sword. The next time Garp comes to train Ace, Sabo, and Yato, Ace would ask him why Luffy is so protective of that sword, and Garp would tell Garp what happened, and Garp would explain Luffy's story and about how his mother gave it to him on the day she died, and would explain why Luffy doesn't like celebrating his birthday. He would tell Ace that Luffy's mother died on his 5th birthday and that sword was the last gift he ever received from her, and he would tell Ace why Luffy has the 9 dragon fruits. He would tell Ace about how Luffy trained the healing powers that his fire gives him and why he ate all 9 fruits and why Luffy is so into training. He loves training and he does it not only cause he loves getting stronger but also so he can be strong enough to protect everyone he cares about. And after hearing about Luffy, Ace would go to Luffy and apologize for trying to touch his sword. Luffy says it's fine and not to worry about it. Now Luffy is 14 and Garp has come back. It's been 2 or 3 years and it's been whatever age I said. He moved in with Dodden. That's the amount of years he lived with them. Years since he started living with Dodden, and now he is gonna join the Marines. A 14-year-old Luffy starts heading towards the village. When he gets there, Ace and Sabo are there, along with the mayor, Makino, and a couple other people to say goodbye to Luffy. I don't really remember if I said Sabo went with Dragon, so if I did then Sabo wouldn't be on the island still, but if I didn't then Sabo is still there. Luffy is leaving and then out of the water rises the Lord of the Coast. Luffy then gets into a stance and then disappears in pure speed and punches the Sea King right in the face, instantly killing it. Now we see our protagonist heading towards an island after smelling blood in the water. When he arrives he sees a pirate ship, and so he goes on the island and starts to wander when he would hear crashing noises and he would start running towards the commotion. When he would arrive he would see 15 fishmen surrounding a woman and 2 little girls. The woman would start to say her goodbyes to her daughters when suddenly a gunshot would be heard. When everyone looked at the woman, they see that nothing happened. All of a sudden a dark chuckle would start to ring around the area. They would then look to where the sound originated from. We now go back to the island. Luffy just came from. A man would appear on a ship with a boy who is around the age of 9. This man would be Dragon, and the boy with him is his second son Yuji. Dragon would then take Yuji up the mountain to Dodon and would give Yuji to her, explaining the situation, and Dodon would then reply, "Why should I take him in exactly? After all, your first brat was already quite the headache. Plus the only one who would have any attachment to this kid is gone." Dragon would ask, "What do you mean? Where's Luffy?" Dodon would then reply with, "Oh, is that concern in your voice I hear? Well, anyway, he left this morning to join the Marines. Anyway, I'm not taking him in. Your first kid was already a huge pain, but at least he could pull his own weight." Dragon would offer her money to take care of Yuji, so Dodon would agree, and Dragon would give her the money and would start walking away. And from this point on, pretty much everything that happened in the original will now happen, because Luffy is no longer around, and Yuji and Yato will replace Luffy in the situations that happened. Now we go back to Luffy. The fishmen would look towards Luffy just to see that he disappeared again, and suddenly all 15 fishmen would fall down with slashes over their chests and they would be knocked unconscious. The only one that would be left standing would be Arlong. Luffy would proceed to take his time beating the hell out of Arlong. After Luffy is finished, he would then kick them to their ship and then kick it back to sea. Luffy would then learn the name of the woman and the 2 girls he saved. The woman would introduce herself as Belmere, and she would introduce her daughters being Nami and Nojiko. Luffy would then introduce himself and would proceed to stay the night and get to know the family of 3, and then Luffy would tell the 3 of them about his brothers, even the one he shouldn't know about being Yuji, and the next morning he would leave. After a couple days of traveling, Luffy would enter the Grand Line, but after he went up then back down Reverse Mountain, his ship was destroyed, so he would end up swimming, and after a couple hours he would end up at Navy HQ, and he would then apply to become a Marine. And after Sengoku would hear of Luffy being there, he would send the 3 admirals to retrieve Luffy and bring him to Sengoku, while Garp would be in the corner eating rice crackers while laughing. We now go back to Luffy. The 3 admiral just found Luffy and are going up to talk with him, then bring him to Sengoku. Sakazuki would start running his mouth and Luffy would hear him, and a fight would then be started. Luffy vs the admirals would be totally one-sided in the favor of Luffy. After Luffy would prove his superiority, he would be promoted to admiral, and after the ass-hooping that the 3 admirals received, they would no longer talk down to Luffy, and so the next couple years go by and Luffy would teach the admirals how to better control their elements, so they would gain even better mastery over their devil fruits, and they would hold a great deal of respect for Luffy. Luffy would also travel around the East Blue at times. He would run into a green-haired boy around the age of his younger brother Yato named Zoro on an island of swordsmen, and he would meet a blonde-haired boy and a blonde-haired man in a new restaurant known as the Barty, and even the son of one of Luffy's old friends cremated, the man being Luffy's friend along with Ben and his captain Shanks, the man's name being Usopp and the boy's name is Usopp. At times Luffy would wander the first part of the Grand Line where he'd meet a cyborg named Frankie, and so a 18-year-old Luffy would spend a couple more years with the Marines. Luffy would retire at the age of 20, so about a year after Ace would have started his journey. Around a year later, Luffy would hear of his younger brother Ace joining Whitebeard, so at the age of 21 a pissed off Luffy would appear on the Moby, Whitebeard's ship. Many of the Whitebeard pirates would try to stand in Luffy's way just to end up getting smacked out of the way. On his way over to Whitebeard, Luffy would have ended up destroying his own shirt, and which would show his tattoos. Many of the Whitebeards would recognize the tattoo of the demonic dragon, and everything would click. The reason the demonic dragon disappeared for the past 8 or so years is because he joined the Marines along with doing other stuff. We now switch perspectives. Ace would have just gotten back to the Moby from a mission assigned to him by Whitebeard. When he would go to tell everyone he's back, he'd notice boobies of his brothers tossed around on guard. Ace would approach Whitebeard and he'd notice a man sitting on the deck in front of Whitebeard talking with him. When he'd get closer, he'd see the tattoo on the man's back, and Ace would quickly and as quietly as possible would run up from behind the man. Everyone thinking he was going to attack Luffy, they all would go a bit pale, but to everyone's shock Ace would hug the man from behind and would yell out, "Big bro, Luffy!" Everyone would be shocked to see Luffy hug him back with a wide smile on his face that would put even the sun to shame, and he would greet Ace as well. Luffy would tell Whitebeard that the reason he is here is to talk with Ace about certain habits that Luffy could have sworn he beat out if Ace, and that's why he was so mad when he got on the Moby. Ace just now realizing what Luffy just said would start to go pale. Ace would start stuttering and everyone else would kinda feel bad for Ace but would also be curious about what habits Luffy thought he beat out of Ace. Ace on the other hand would start apologizing to Luffy but Luffy wouldn't be listening and he would punch Ace so hard that he'd go flying to the nearest island. After about 15 minutes Ace would return with a bump on his head and soaking wet. After about 3 hours Marco would speak up. As entertaining as this is, what habits are you trying to get rid of? Luffy would respond, well, you see, during my time as a marine it became known that Ace here is my younger brother and well, I ended up getting a lot of complaints about Ace burning down marine ships and marine bases. Those complaints mainly came from Sengoku and the other admirals, while some lower ranked females complained about how my younger brother is a pervert who is constantly putting the moves on them whenever they meet and just stupid shit like that, and I had to deal with that shit for 2 full years. Where did my poor innocent little brother go? And why did he have to get replaced with you? He'd say while looking towards Ace. Ace would just end up rubbing the back of his head nervously. Well, to be fair, you weren't the best role model, Luffy, Ace would respond. Luffy would then ask, the hell? What are you talking about? Ace would respond with, well, Luffy, during the few times you helped us steal from the nobles of Goa Kingdom you always, well, how to put this? You always ended up distracting the female nobles while the males would look at you with a pissed off look on their faces, and Luffy would then start rubbing the back of his head and start nervously chuckling. Luffy would then change the subject by asking, why did you join Whitebeard? I get that if you wanted to join a strong pirate crew and if you wanted a bigger family, but you set out to be a better pirate than your father, correct? Everyone on the Moby would be shocked but they'd still be wondering who Ace's father is, while Whitebeard would start grinning and would say, so that's why you set out, huh? And after a couple of hours Luffy would start to leave, but Luffy would then disappear in a burst of speed, and when he'd reappear he'd have his foot planted in the back of Teach's head and would say, you've been watching me ever since I stepped on this ship and it's quite irritating. After that he'd leave. Luffy would then head back to the island he was born on and spend the next couple of years there training. So now we time skip a couple of years, and through completely dumb luck Yuji would have found the gum fruit and he'd take the place of Luffy throughout the story of One Piece. And one day Yuji would be on Amazon Lily when he would hear of Ace's capture. Everything would go the same as the original, except instead of it being Luffy it would be Yuji, and Yuji would have all the straw hats from the original. We go to when the war starts. Whitebeard would show up and announce, you Marines are fools. I hope you know that. Every Marine would be wondering what would make Whitebeard so calm, and when Sengoku would let his confusion be known, Whitebeard would respond with, you guys probably just pissed off the most powerful man in this world. Every Marine would be even more confused. Meanwhile the higher ranks would slowly start to realize what he means, and the 3 admirals would speak up, he's right, we'd best speed this along before he shows up, because if there's one thing he won't tolerate it's his younger brother being executed. After those words, everyone who would have been around at the same time as Luffy would then realize what they mean. And with a monstrous grin Whitebeard would yell out, you not only pissed me off but you also managed to piss off one of the most feared people in this world. That's right, you captured and are planning to execute his younger brother. Do you really think that Monkey D. Luffy would allow this? The whole world would be surprised that Ace is the younger brother of Luffy, and after this whole thing Whitebeard would then tilt the entire sea and cause the huge waves, and that is when Aokiji would then freeze everything. Then a ship would start falling from the sky. Everyone would see the infamous rookie Monkey D. Yuji along with a bunch of other people. Everything would proceed the same as in the original, including when Sengoku would reveal the heritage of Monkey D. Yuji and Monkey D. Luffy. Sengoku would say, raised as the stepbrother of Luffy. Luffy raised Ace since Luffy was 12 years old and Ace was 10, and then after 2 years at the age of 14 Luffy left to become a marine, and shortly after he left Dragon appeared and gave his youngest son Yuji to the bandits who raised Ace, and after that Ace and Yuji grew up as step-brothers. And after that everything would happen same as the original, and then Yuji would free Ace and pretty much same thing happens. Whitebeard orders the retreat, and when leaving Sakazuki would start talking about Whitebeard and it would anger Ace, and Ace would attack Akainu. The same thing happens as Yuji would drop the Vivre card Ace gave him, except when Akainu would attack Luffy and Ace would jump in the way right before Akainu's attack could land. He'd be sent flying by a foot, and the person who just kicked him would land right in front of Ace, and the man would say, Ace, what did I say about fighting those stronger than you? Ace, surprised, would start stuttering and would ask with tears in his eyes, Luffy, why are you here? Luffy would respond by telling Ace, now what kind of older brother would I be if I just stood by and allowed my younger brother to be killed? Now I think it's time to put this to an end, don't you? Luffy would then proceed to let out his conqueror's haki and would ask, now Sengoku, Sakazuki, Kazan, and Borsalino, what gave you the idea to try and execute my younger brother? Did you seriously think that CP-1-8 could keep the news away from me, and did you really think that CP-0 could truly keep me busy long enough to not get here on time? Sure, they bought you a couple hours, but now they are all out cold. Sengoku would start speaking. Luffy, if you help these two you'll become an enemy of the world. Govern. Luffy would then interrupt Sengoku. Shut up. Did you really think that'd work? Do you wanna know what my goal in life is? At this point everyone around the world watching would be curious. The ones most interested would be Big Mom and her children, Kaido, and the upper ranks of the Beast Pirates, Big News, Morgan, Dragon, and multiple other parties. Luffy would then exclaim, my ambition may be foolish, and whatever else you want to call it, I don't care. My goal is to become king of the pirates. Shocked silence would befall the world. One of the strongest men in the world has the ambition of becoming pirate king. Everywhere around the world roars would shake the earth, and then 9 very fast objects would be speeding towards Marineford, and when they'd arrive the cameras would point up and all the eyes there would follow, and what they'd see would shock them. 9 dragons would appear. Luffy would then call out the names of the 9 dragons: Ignia, Merkphobia, Skyadrum, Vicelija, Negisa, Spade, Karma, Leo, Igneal, and finally Acknowledge. Everyone in the world would be shocked. Luffy would then proceed to explain that 7 of those dragons come from him. He'd say the names of the 7. He would then exclaim, Igneal the Fire Dragon King is the dragon from Ace's Fruit, while Acknowledge is a dragon that's been around for thousands of years but hasn't really bothered anyone, and until recently he was asleep and I woke him up and we became friends. Everyone would be shocked. Luffy would then start speaking once again, the war is now over. If anyone wants to continue then come at me, and at this time Kizaru would jump out of a building that Marco kicked him into and would send an attack at the building. When the building would collapse, Blackbeard and his crew would be seen, and in a moment of rage Luffy would go to attack Blackbeard, but Ace, Whitebeard and Shanks, who just showed up, would stop him. And Shanks would say, I see you haven't lost your fire, kid, but I think it'd be best to leave him alone for now. Ace and Whitebeard would agree, saying that it's not Luffy's problem and it's the Whitebeard's pirates' business. Luffy would then speak up, you see, usually I'd agree with you, Shanks, Whitebeard, but you say the bastard touched my younger brother and almost got him executed, so I can't forgive him for that, but if it makes you feel better I'll at least let him continue breathing for now. Luffy would then blur past Shanks, Ace, and Whitebeard and would plant a foot in the back of Blackbeard's head. Teach would end up on the ground, and when the rest of his crew would turn to attack Luffy, Luffy would shoot bullets of fire, wind, water, light, and darkness at his enemies and would end up defeating them quite easily. Luffy would then step off of Teach and kick him in the side just hard enough to roll him over. Luffy would then get on top of Teach and start beating the hell out of him. Shanks would start thinking that this is much like what happened back in Fuchsia all those years ago when Luffy beat Higama. Luffy would continue to rain down blows on Teach's face. Everyone around would be surprised because they haven't seen anyone from East Blue do something like this. After about 15 minutes both the Marines and Teach's crew would start running towards Luffy to get Luffy off of Teach. The Marines would want Luffy off of Teach so they can arrest both Luffy and Teach's crew is running to get Luffy off of their captain. But before they could get to Luffy, 9 figures would stand in their way. At that moment everyone would notice that the 9 dragons that were in the sky are gone, and they'd look towards the 9 figures to see that they were humans, but they'd notice that they all have a defining feature that matched with one of the 9 dragons, and they'd all figure it out, that the dragons can turn into humans. Luffy would continue to beating the shit out of Teach, constantly raining blows down. After another 5 minutes they don't see Teach struggling and they think he's dead, but then they'd see Luffy stop and engulf Teach in flames, but oddly enough, Teach isn't burning. After about a minute the flames would die down and everyone would see a perfectly healed Teach, and everyone, especially Whitebeard and his sons, would be wondering why Luffy healed him, but they'd soon figure it out when Luffy would start punching Teach once again, and they'd hear Luffy say, you're not allowed to die just yet. I'm still not satisfied. I'll heal you over and over until I'm satisfied, then and only then will you be allowed to die. Everyone would feel a shiver go up their spine at those words. Even the 3 admirals and Sengoku would feel fear and would pity Teach. After another half an hour Luffy would stop and start walking away. He'd grab Ace and Yuji and start walking away. He'd throw flames at Whitebeard and it'd be too fast for anyone to stop accepting his death. Whitebeard would close his eyes and he'd think, I guess this is my punishment for not stopping Ace from going after Teach. I accept my death. And as he'd think that he'd hear, it's not your time yet, Whitebeard. You've treated Ace like a son even while knowing who his father is, and even though it's been revealed to the world you still fought for him. You are a true father, and everyone would be shocked at those words, and in his head Whitebeard would hear thank you for taking care of Ace. Pops, after hearing that last part Whitebeard would be shocked at that, but he'd smile nonetheless, and all the pirates would leave Marineford with the Marines suffering a major defeat because of Luffy, and everyone in the Marines are mad at Luffy for siding with pirates, but they are even angrier with Sengoku and the higher ranks, in which thought it would be a good idea to try and publicly execute Luffy's younger brother Ace. All over the world the balance has been shattered, because now with Luffy making his desire known to the world, everyone sees him not as a pirate nor as the son of dragon. They see him as something that can't be tamed, a beast who will destroy any and all in his way. A couple weeks after the war in Marineford, it's reported that Monkey D. Luffy joined the Whitebeard pirates and that Whitebeard is looking to retire and put Luffy in charge. Information is then released about how many years ago Luffy met Whitebeard, and even though Luffy was a Marine Admiral, Whitebeard still offered to take him into his crew, and the only ones who knew about the offer and the answer to said offer was Whitebeard and Marco, and the answer all those years ago was a yes. Luffy helped Whitebeard out a lot, but everyone just saw it as a coincidence, though some would start questioning why the Marines didn't look further into it. But the only answer they got was, if Admiral Monkey D. Luffy said something, you didn't question it, cause sure, unlike Sakazuki, he wouldn't kill you, but he would beat the hell out of you and scare the shit out of you while he was at it. Accepting these words, the reporters would back off. Yuji would have went and trained with Rayleigh for 2 years, and his crew would train in the same way as the original. Luffy would become the captain of the Whitebeard pirates, but Whitebeard would still be alive, and Luffy would have healed him of his injuries and would have cured his sickness, so he would live, and Ace would stay with the crew as well, and Ace would have also spent those 2 years training with Luffy on how to better use his powers, and Sabo would have eaten the Mera Mera no Mi in the 2 years, and he would have contacted Luffy to help train him, and Luffy and Ace would train Sabo in how to use the fruit. After the 2 years, Whitebeard, Luffy, Ace, Marco, and the rest of the crew would be reading through the newspaper and read about how Yuji defeated Big Mom, and after a couple weeks they'd hear of Yuji going to Wano, so Luffy would send Marco, Ace, and a couple of the other commanders to help Yuji in Wano. Eventually they'd hear of Kaido's defeat, and then the world would receive shocking news: Luffy, the new captain of the Whitebeard pirates, would have disappeared for a few days and would have returned with lots of treasure and even Roger's ship, and that's when they'd crown Luffy as the new king of the pirates. But after he'd be crowned, something would happen. He'd seemingly betray his own crew by disappearing one day, and a couple days later the Dragon Clan would start attacking islands. Soon after, the Marines would find out that Luffy is the clan head and is the one ordering them all to do this, and seemingly no one could stop him. After a couple weeks, Luffy would completely destroy the Holy Land and would have killed all the celestial dragons along with the Gorosei and the rest of the Red Line. Very few people would know what Luffy is doing, which he is making himself look like a villain, so someone will come and strike him down. The Whitebeard crew would be mad at Luffy for all that he's doing because he is attacking innocent people, and they would be planning on going and confronting him, but Whitebeard would stop them. Angry, they'd want an explanation, and so Whitebeard would tell them Luffy is giving the world a demon that seemingly no one can defeat. He wants someone to come along and strike him down and then be known as a hero, even if it's a pirate who does it. Whitebeard would then look towards Ace while saying the last part. Whitebeard would continue with, I think he wants his brothers to be the one to strike him down, so they won't be looked at as the son of Roger, or as the son of Dragon, or Dragon's right hand. He wants you guys to be recognized by your own names, titles, and reputations. Understanding would wash over everyone there, and they'd cow to help Luffy with his plan. And Whitebeard would say, for a long time the Dragon Clan has been very powerful, so powerful to the point they probably agreed to this knowing that it'd cause someone or something to rise that'd be powerful enough to give them a challenge and even allow them to fall in battle. Because that's what the Dragon Clan wants. They want a challenge. Their greatest pride and honor is to die in battle. After a couple weeks they'd face Luffy. After continuous fighting for 5 days straight, Luffy finally fell. He would have died standing with no wounds or scars on his back. Yuji would be known as the new Pirate King, and Ace would have became the new captain of the Whitebeard pirates, and after a couple years a new world government would rise, but this time they would outlaw slavery and everything else that's outlawed in the real world. We go to Luffy wherever he is. Luffy opens his eyes and sees he's floating in a white void, and he'd be wondering where he's at, and then a voice would speak. Monkey D. Luffy, you've committed many crimes in life, but also those crimes ended up benefiting the world in the end, even though you were only thinking about your family. We have decided to give you another life, so live it well. A second voice would speak up, except this one's voice is dripping with malevolence, cause more chaos would ya. When Luffy would open his eyes he'd see his mother, and when he'd look into a mirror he'd see himself when he was 2 years old. The end. This is the end to What If Luffy Was Born into the Dragon Clan. It wasn't very long and I did enjoy writing it, but I didn't really know where to take it, though I might redo it later on in the future.